The certified letter demanding $250,000 showed up the very same day I laid my father to rest. That was the moment the power-drunk HOA board sealed the worst mistake of their miserable lives. Picture this: I'm standing in my driveway at 3 in the afternoon, still in my funeral suit, red cemetery dirt caked on my shoes. My mouth tastes like iron, pure rage, while I stare at this notice claiming I somehow owed $250,000 for property violations on land my grandfather bought back in 1952. Long before this neighborhood even existed. The stench of diesel from a passing garbage truck can't drown out the cloying sweetness of Karen Whitmore's perfume as she saunters over in her designer black dress. Botox smile, fake sympathy. Terrible timing, Marcus, but business is business, she purrs, handing me papers that threaten to erase 3 generations of my family's work. Here's what Karen didn't know: I wasn't just defending my workshop. I was about to find out I legally owned half of her precious subdivision. Now tell me, what would you do if some HOA queen tried to snatch your land while you're still grieving? Drop your wildest revenge fantasy below. And let me know, does your neighborhood have its own HOA horror stories? But before I tell you how Karen went down in flames, I need to take you back. Because my family's story explains everything. My name is Marcus Castellano. I'm 42 years old, a third-generation contractor who inherited my father's construction business, along with every calloused hand and unshakable principle that came with it. The land where this battle began is a 3-acre spread my grandfather, Antonio, bought back in 1952 with $800 cash. Picture it. Back then, nothing surrounded us but endless cornfields and cow pastures. The house itself is modest, a 1,200 square foot ranch that's seen better days but still stands as sturdy as the day it was built. What really matters is the workshop out back. That's where the hiss of my welding torch blends with the crunch of gravel under steel-toed boots, a sound my family's been making for 70 years. Life had been rough lately. I was fresh out of a messy divorce, and my 16-year-old daughter, Emma, came to visit every other weekend. She's the brightest part of my world. Watching her pick up Grandpa's old tools in the same workshop where he taught my father, and my father taught me, that land isn't just property. It's legacy. It's everything worth protecting. Now meet the villain of this story, Karen Whitmore, 38 years old. Once a pharmaceutical sales rep, she reinvented herself as a community advocate after moving into Willowbrook Estates 8 years ago. She's about 5 feet 6 inches in designer heels, her aggressively blonde hair practically screaming I demand to speak to the manager from 3 blocks away. Her suffocating floral perfume rolls in ahead of her like tear gas. She lives in a 4,200 square foot colonial, manicured lawn, and an imported Italian fountain out front that probably costs more than my truck. Karen clawed her way to HOA president through a mix of manipulation, proxy votes from snowbirds, and what can only be described as weaponized passive aggressiveness. She's the type to smile while sinking the knife in, then act scandalized that you bled on her designer rug. Here's the setup. My family's land predates all of this by half a century. Until 2003, we were still ringed by farmland. Then Hartwell Properties bought 200 acres and dropped a 47-home subdivision right around us. The developer even offered my grandfather $400,000 to sell out, serious money at the time. But Grandpa refused, stubborn Italian to the core. When he passed in 1994, the land stayed in our name, just as he intended. As more families filled their pristine suburban paradise, hostility toward my so-called eyesore workshop grew louder. Never mind that my family was here first. Never mind that my business operated squarely within city ordinances. Every time I run my hand over the worn leather of my grandfather's surveyor tools, still sharp and true after 70 years, I'm reminded that some things are worth preserving, no matter what the neighbors think. Karen's crusade began with petty jabs. Noise complaints about my 7 a.m. starts, even though the law allows work at 6. Demands to hide my equipment behind barriers, so her property values wouldn't suffer. She hinted my business attracted undesirable elements to her family-friendly neighborhood. Thinly veiled code I recognized instantly, though at first I chose to let it slide. But she didn't stop. The harassment escalated. She sicked city inspectors on me 6 times in 3 months, hunting for violations. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Every permit in order, every regulation followed. Still, Karen wasn't finished. The breaking point came with that $250,000 fine. Unauthorized structures. Environmental violations. Delivered the morning I buried my father, the man who taught me integrity, grit, and the value of honest work. The cruelty in that timing wasn't coincidence. It was a calculated strike. Her opening salvo arrived in a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. The notice claimed my workshop violated HOA covenants that somehow applied to land standing decades before her subdivision was even a sketch on a developer's napkin. Karen demanded I demolish unpermitted structures, including my grandfather's original 1952 workshop, built in an era when the only permits you needed were for hunting, not hammering. The threat was spelled out in black and white: $500 daily fines, attorney fees, and a 30-day deadline. And I swear I could hear Karen's smug sigh drift across the street as her printer spat out legal documents like ammunition from a harassment factory. I'm no lawyer, but I'm no fool either. While Karen was probably toasting her brilliant strategy with an overpriced glass of Chardonnay, I was busy doing something radical: actual research. Digging through my father's meticulous filing system, I struck gold. Tucked between yellowed receipts from 1975 was the original 1952 property deed. Not a photocopy, the original. My grandfather's careful signature beside the county clerk's seal, untouched for decades. A conversation with my contractor buddy Jake years back came rushing back. HOA covenants? They only apply to properties that signed onto them. My grandfather never signed a thing, because there was no HOA to sign with. Our deed predates Karen's subdivision by 51 years. As the faint scent of my father's Old Spice clung to that office, I could almost feel his hand on my shoulder, approving. Karen had made her first fatal miscalculation. But she wasn't stopping at private intimidation. No, she needed a public spectacle. She staged a neighborhood safety meeting, cramming 30 anxious homeowners into the Willowbrook clubhouse while she clicked through a PowerPoint titled "Protecting Our Community Values." Then came her Facebook group, Willowbrook Concerned Citizens, complete with inflammatory photos of my workshop and captions like "Industrial Hazard in Residential Zone" and "Property Values at Risk." Her recruiting was sharp, I'll give her that. She pulled together a coalition: Dr. Bradley Lucas, a cardiologist fretting about air quality impacts; Susan Reeves, an elementary teacher wringing her hands over child safety; and Tom Morrison, the bank manager, who gravely warned about mortgage implications. And, of course, Karen's favorite claim, that my property attracted undesirable elements, a dog whistle we all knew the meaning of. My counterattack was simple: facts. At their next HOA meeting, I strode into the clubhouse unannounced, Jake the surveyor at my side. I laid the deed and survey documents across the table, explaining, calmly, the legal reality they couldn't wish away. Karen's response? Exactly what I expected. She waved a manicured hand over the paperwork and insisted my grandfather had somehow illegally exempted himself from community standards. The board, clearly prepped in advance, voted 4-1 to move forward with enforcement. That's when I fired my first warning shot. Karen, you might want to double-check your legal position before this gets expensive, for everyone. But while she thought her legal theater was scaring me, I was quietly building an arsenal. Photographing every incident. Logging every false claim. Stacking a case file so airtight it could make Perry Mason weep with joy. The rough concrete floor of my grandfather's workshop had carried 3 generations of honest work. Now, it was about to witness the start of Karen's spectacular collapse. Her response? Pure Karen. She escalated. She hired Davidson & Associates, a flashy downtown law firm with $15,000 retainers and suits worth more than my truck. They sent a second notice demanding a property appraisal for forced sale. She even claimed the HOA had eminent domain authority, a mistake that revealed just how little she understood about the law. That's when the truth clicked. Karen wasn't just bullying me into compliance. She was trying to outright steal my land. She thought intimidation and deep pockets would win. What she didn't realize was that while she was busy playing checkers, I was preparing to introduce her to chess, and I'd been studying the game for 42 years. Her pressure campaign shifted into overdrive, like a Ferrari driven by a drunk teenager. Fast, expensive, and inevitably headed straight for a brick wall. Certified letters arrived weekly, each one more absurd than the last. Demands for new property surveys, environmental assessments, compliance reports that would make the EPA roll their eyes. Karen insisted my diesel storage violated federal law, conveniently ignoring that my 500-gallon tank was permitted and inspected every single year. She filed zoning complaints, pushed petitions, and somehow wrangled 34 residents into signing a demand for my immediate relocation. The irony was laughable. They wanted to relocate the guy who'd been here since before most of them were even born. So I went textbook defense. Hired the best property rights attorney I could afford, Rebecca Santos, recommended by Jake's brother-in-law, who'd fought and beaten a similar HOA in the next county. Rebecca specialized in land disputes like mine. Her first advice was pure gold: document everything, trust nothing, and never let them see you sweat. I installed perimeter security cameras, created detailed timelines of every harassment stunt, filed counter-complaints for defamation and harassment, and I leaned on one of my father's greatest lessons: sometimes the best way to beat a bully is to let them punch themselves in the face. Karen's big win came when she discovered my workshop storage shed addition, built in 1998, didn't have a specific permit. Technically, she was right. My grandfather had built it before modern permitting rules existed. She treated the discovery like buried treasure, practically skipping to the HOA meeting to gloat. City Code Enforcement Officer Dave, a fair guy who'd known my father for years, was obligated to issue a violation. A $50,000 fine plus mandatory removal. Painful, but not fatal. Karen, of course, celebrated early, already fantasizing about the payday she thought was coming. What she didn't know was that while she was busy parading her victory, I was buried in county archives every evening. Down in fluorescent-lit basements that smelled like old paper and broken dreams, I photocopied records dating back to the 1940s. And what I uncovered would change everything. That's where I spotted the first crack in Karen's perfect little kingdom. The original subdivision plat maps told a damning story. When Hartwell Properties carved out Willowbrook Estates in 2003, their surveyor made what my old friend Pete would call a whoopsie. They included 0.3 acres of my family's land in their development plan, land they didn't own, couldn't sell, and had no right to touch. And it got better. Several homes in Karen's precious subdivision were partially built on my property. The foundation of 1247 Maple Lane crossed my line by 8 feet. The garage at 1251 Maple crept 12 feet onto my land. And the crown jewel? The HOA's beloved playground sat entirely on ground my grandfather had been paying taxes on for 50 years. The deeper I dug, the sweeter it got. In a dusty cabinet marked Water Rights 1950 to 1960, I found a 1953 agreement granting my grandfather exclusive rights to the natural spring feeding the entire area. Every drop in Karen's retention pond, every sprinkler keeping those manicured lawns alive, even the gallons fueling her ridiculous Italian fountain, every bit of it flowed from my spring. For 8 years Karen had been stealing my water without even realizing it. The irony was delicious. I kept quiet, following Rebecca's advice not to show my hand too soon. Instead, I hired a professional survey crew to remap my property with GPS precision. The results matched the archives. 12 houses encroached on my land, the HOA's common space legally belonged to me, and even Karen's backyard gazebo trespassed 8 feet over the line. While she thought she'd cornered me with her permit discovery, I was holding cards that could force half her neighborhood to uproot their lives. But timing was everything. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is letting your enemy think they're winning, until they realize the grave they've been digging is their own. Karen, oblivious, escalated again, this time to federal agencies. She filed complaints with anyone whose name came in acronyms: Health Department, Fire Marshal, Zoning, even the EPA. 4 separate agencies swarmed my property in a single week. Clipboards in hand, they inspected everything. And every one of them cleared me. Fire safety? Perfect. Environmental compliance? Exemplary. Zoning? Within code. The EPA inspector even complimented my setup. Karen's response? Meltdown. She accused the inspectors of corruption and demanded state-level rechecks. Watching her unravel before City Council was like witnessing the final boss battle of all Karens. Every classic move deployed, each one more desperate than the last. Meanwhile, Rebecca taught me about something chilling: adverse possession. If someone builds on your land and you don't object for 20 years, they can legally claim it. The clock had started in 2003. I was staring down the danger zone. We had a narrow window to reclaim what was ours, and we'd have to move strategically. Karen, blind to the trap, launched her next masterstroke of stupidity: the media. She invited Channel 8 News, with reporter Jessica Mills, to cover the dangerous commercial operator threatening suburban safety. Karen painted herself as a heroic community protector. But when Jessica showed up with her camera crew, I was ready. I didn't rant. Didn't shout. I calmly laid out my permits, my grandfather's original deed, the harassment timeline, and Rebecca's legal analysis. Jessica was no hack. She recognized the real story. The segment that aired wasn't "zoning violation threatens neighborhood." It was HOA overreach, when property rights collide with suburban expectations. Karen's fury was nuclear. She called the station demanding retractions, crying conspiracy. But her rage only amplified what I uncovered next. My public records request for HOA financials arrived, and the results made Karen's meltdown look like child's play. The HOA had spent $47,000 in legal fees fighting me, drained straight from special assessments charged to every homeowner. Karen had funded her vendetta with her neighbors' wallets, and most had no clue. Old paper and broken trust filled the air as I tallied expense after expense. Money that should have gone to road repairs, landscaping, basic upkeep, all funneled into Davidson and Associates' pockets. Neighbors started asking questions. Why were their dues doubling? Why were projects neglected? The answers were printed right there in black and white. Hundreds of billed hours researching ways to ruin the guy who'd lived there decades before them. But the true twist came buried in the HOA's incorporation documents. A requirement for presidency: a resident must live in the community at least 10 years before taking office. Karen had only been in Willowbrook for 8. Her entire presidency was invalid. Every vote she cast, every legal action she pushed through, every dollar she wasted, null and void under their own bylaws. Karen hadn't just broken the rules. She'd never been qualified to play the game at all.